Hi, everyone. Welcome to Art Salon. I'm Ellie Shore, and I've been organizing these salons since 2012. For most of that time in person at the Armory Arts Center, and now, of course, virtually. Art salons are a gathering place for artists, curators, and many others who want to know more about contemporary art. It's also a chance to meet each other and share our thoughts, our questions, and our experiences. So, if you haven't already done this, please turn on your video and let's take a moment to see each other. Hello, people. Oh, people I haven't seen in a long time. Wonderful. Welcome. Yay. Oh, absolutely wonderful. And more people coming in all the time, including several people that I don't know. So that I find is very exciting too. And now I'd like to introduce Juana Valdes. She is a very exciting Miami artist. I first became aware of her when I saw her work at Hollywood Art and Culture Center in Hollywood. One of her prints was there, and it was an image of an antique figurine, one that was frankly very familiar to me from my childhood. I saw several more after that. And then I found her huge and unique installation while visiting the Perez Art Museum in Miami. The installation is set on an extremely long, narrow table, covered from end to end with a huge collection of teapots, figurines, carvings, and more from around the world, all randomly placed, or at least it looked that way to me. I didn't understand it at all. Why is this here? Until I read the label, and it explained that her purpose was to comment on globalization and the movement of people as well as products around the world. I met Juana last winter during a studio visit to Fountainhead in Miami. She was working on the final pieces for an exhibit that was about to open at the Freedom Tower in Miami Beach. We chatted a bit, and I realized she would be a great speaker to have at Art Salon. I invited her on the spot, and here we are today. Juana's latest work, Rest Ashore, just ended an exhibition at Locust Projects in Miami and will become a traveling exhibition, which is very exciting. It's her first video project and includes archival news footage of the 4 waves of Cuban immigration to the United States, as well as her own more experiential video, which could refer to the plight of any of many groups worldwide who risk their lives at sea in order to escape unbearable conditions and seek freedom in some new home. Juana's work is represented by Spinello Projects, and the work has been widely seen and enthusiastically praised by an international audience. Oh, one last thing. Juana is a Cuban-born artist and educator who lives in Miami and also in Massachusetts, where she is an associate professor in printmaking at UMass Amherst. Her talk tonight is titled Rest Ashore, Race, Transnationalism, Gender, Labor, Class. And it is my pleasure to introduce you to her now. Juana, your turn.
Thank you for that amazing and incredible introduction. I'm so touched. It's hard to imagine, but we did have this conversation about doing this talk over a year ago at the Fountainhead during the open studio. So that for me is amazing that we actually stayed in touch, and a year later, we coordinated this talk, and it's happening not in person, but it's still happening virtually, and so that's great. So thank you for sticking at it and making sure that I visit even if it was only virtually. I want to send out a big shout out to Rolando Barrero, who I'm seeing up there on one of the many faces, who I have known since we were both at Miami-Dade Community College when we were babies, because we started out when we were babies. And I know he is an influential artist and activist up in West Palm. So big shout out to him, and thank you for being here tonight with everybody else. Thank you. appreciate you taking time out of your day and your evening to share and to talk and to be artists together, even if we can't physically be together, to be together in thought, to be together in spirit, to be together in sharing what is meaningful and precious to us. So for that, I appreciate your being here tonight. Um, Ellie asked me to produce a talk that I originally thought I was going to focus it primarily on the work for the work of the Locust Project, but instead, she asked for me to go a little bit further and sort of to talk more about my practice as an artist, and that would be more interesting to the group. So the presentation that I put together actually kind of begins to talk about the work and how this interest in ceramic and how printmaking also adds on to the ceramic, which printmaking is something I've done from the very beginning of my sort of art practice, but it fluctuates in and out of the work. I'm going to run you through some of the earlier work, not early, but earlier work, and then into the most contemporary exhibition, which is the Rest Ashore that took place at Locust Project. You're looking at an image of a still from the video of the Rest Ashore. But I began with this particular project because one of the things that my earliest piece in which I've actually exhibited maybe once in Miami is this beautiful dress, which is an organza dress, which someone had given to me and I wore. And I took that dress and decorated it with fish hooks. So the work that you see in here was actually done in Havana, and the work which begins as a series of paper boats. I was done a performance piece intervention in a malecon in Havana, and I took out the pages from a book and I started to rip them and create into small little boats and then to cast them into the ocean. I did that project in Cuba. I thought it was really meaningful. I was using the novel of Juana Valdes, which is a very sort of a popular novel written by a Cuban author. And I made these boats, made this performance, and then sort of walked away from that piece thinking about it. And then in 2002, I had the opportunity to go to Holland to do a residency in ceramic. And it was for the first time I found working with porcelain, and I realized that it was the perfect material to recreate this project. And I made these close to about 100 and something boats, made a mold and reshape them and created this installation of all these boats. And I made them in the shape of a wave, right? A very stylized wave on the floor. And it's really the beginning of my going back to thinking about my own journey of migration. And this is done from the point of a child thinking about what it means to leave your own home. And a child doesn't really understand this, right? It's just something that happens. And so those boats really begin to present how that experience was for me. I had the opportunity to go back to the residence again in 2012, and this time with a little bit or more of understanding of what the materials that I was working with. So you're looking at what's called the colored china rags, and they're actually made out of bone china, which is also a porcelain. And now I'm aware of the history of the material and its sort of preciousness as a white clay, because it's the whitest of clay, and that whole idea of the beauty in the whiteness. And so what I do is I actually alter the clay, the body of the clay, by adding pigment to it. And so by achieving a range of colors, and this is very typical in the Caribbean, right? When you think about the Caribbean, you think about Brazil, and especially for women, you end up finding both women and men of all different colors. And this whole piece is really about that, about talking about the beauty in women's body, about the color in relationship to women's body, and how that also plays out in terms of desirability and exoticism, but also in terms of value. You know, how when you're young and, you know, beautiful, women are visible. As you get older and you mature, you become less visible and more invisible. The shape of this piece is actually a cleaning rag, And it's done intentionally because it's the rag that most women use as sort of domestic labor, cleaning, whether in hotels or in homes. And so it related the value of a woman in terms of her labor to the value of a woman in terms of her body and her beauty and her desirability, layering that with this also issue of mixed race that exists within the Caribbean, that the lighter you are, the better you are, and the more desirable you are. And they're usually in sets of about 15 to 20 that I make this piece, and they usually lay one next to the other, and each one is individually shaped and fired, and the recipe for the colors is an individual recipe that I create. So it's not a pre-existing color that you can actually find, and it was intentionally done to sort of think about color and to think about skin tones. This brought me to the piece at the Paris Art Museum, and I came back from that work and was kind of really mesmerized by the beauty of the material, but I realized that I really needed to also deal with this other component of the material and its history to trace. So both the Dutch East Indian Company and the British East Indian Company are the first corporations ever created in the world, and they're really created solely for the idea of trade. And these are entities that are actually eventually have fleets of ships, armies, outposts, and really control the market, and predominantly not just the market in spices and natural materials that were being brought in, like rubber and cacao and all those things, but also in porcelain. So the Dutch were the only ones that dealt with the Japanese and the Chinese exporting porcelain back to the United States. And I begin the process of collecting these and sorting this object and putting these objects together in a way to really to talk about the history of colonization and the history of global trade and how they are interlocked from the very beginning. What you're seeing here now is the installation at Project Row House, which took place in March of 2019. And I was invited to actually come into the space and transform it. And so all of the objects that you're seeing here are actually purchased in Texas, in Houston, where we were doing the residency, and integrated into this, as you can see back here, is a timeline. And in the process of that, what I did was I actually had my mother do the 23andMe. I don't know how many of you have done it. I had my mother take the 23andMe test to look at our genealogy. And I did it specifically because she would be one less mixed than I was, right? And of course, more close and tied to the original component of Africa or whatever else. And what the DNA confirmed was this other aspect, which we are actually partially Chinese as well. And she had always said that, but I've never seen anybody, right? And we don't have a Chinese last name. And it was oral history. And so I needed to have it confirmed because I didn't trust my mother. I believed her, but I needed proof. And so when I did the DNA, that's one of the things you could see. You see coastal West Africa, and you see Indonesia, Thai, and Khmer. And it's interesting because the DNA begins to able to trace it in the 1600s. It's 1660 the first time. And for anybody that's done it, the way you determine whether if you have that nationality is you must have enough DNA within the lineage to denote a specific individual. Right. So every time you see a century or a date, you're seeing the compound combination of that DNA that symbolizes one individual for this one particular part of either Africa or actually Asia, which we ended up having people from in Indonesia, from Vietnam. So it also made me aware that there was a migration within the migration, right? And the history actually of the Caribbean shows that combination. So this is another year later, and actually this is in the fall of the same year, I had the opportunity to bring that show into a more traditional gallery space. And this took place at the Miami-Dade Community College, their Legacy Gallery. which is part of their special collection. And there's a small gallery, just really beautiful size space. And of course, it didn't have all that history and of the project row houses, but I had to figure out a way how to make it work within that space. And so it's again the same as you can see the 1600 where it began, and it sort of lists a very generic African hunter gatherer, and it sort of kind of denotes a specific. But as the install gets around the space, it actually has Congolese. It actually has also from the, as you saw, the coast east, west of Africa. And this particular project, what does is two things. It doesn't only show the objects, but it also shows the cyanotypes, which were a series of prints that I started to generate. And the prints show the bottom of the objects. I realized that that was something that people wanted to do, like they wanted to come to the space and pick up the objects, and you really couldn't, right? And so it satisfied two things: the desire for people to pick up the object and to see where they're from, and also a way of my tracking these objects as we can see their place of origin, right? And I don't have a detail up close of the cyanotypes, but some of them are in Germany, some of them are in Ireland, some of them are in Spain, some of them are in Portugal, and you see how this sort of trade and the history of trade actually moves, and especially working in porcelain and working in bone china, actually comes out of Asia and into Europe and ultimately into the America, because it also becomes an industry in early America, in especially out of New Jersey and Pennsylvania, right? Which they have actually factories, and they have women, a lot of women are working there making these objects. What I do is I integrate the porcelain with these other found objects as I started to do this collecting, which are minerals and materials, wood, brass, iron, copper, which are also coming from all of these other sort of colonized countries like India and Pakistan and South America. All of these things are raw materials that are being exported out of this country, shipped to Europe. They're being refabricated and then exported as commodities out to the rest of the world. And it really sort of begins to show how this needs to be looked at as a global issue, and how it also functioned globally, even at the early onset of the creating of the empires. With that was the fall of last year. In 2018, I actually also won the Ellis Award in Miami. And I'm really, another point in time that I'm really grateful, because it gave me the opportunity I presented a project that I had not done yet. And I requested the money to do this video project. So it's 2018. It's, how should I say? So from 2015 on, we started to see the videos and the imageries of the refugees, the Syrian refugees are coming out and making it to Greece and into Italy. And it really reminded me a lot of the experience, more than anything, of a Mariel Botlif, and then the experience of the Balseros in 1994. And it created a kind of trauma for me, because this imagery just felt like heartbreaking, and especially the ones of the children dying, on the shore. And I realized that I wanted to use my own personal experience to talk about this issue of migration, and especially migration by sea, because if you go back to the slave trade in the Middle Passage, it's just another form of migration. It's a fourth migration, but it's still a migration nonetheless, and a place where many lives were also lost.
After 6 p.m., beginning a 3-hour remote that carried WCKT viewers through a period of prisoner emotionalism, processing, feeding, and finally their reunion with loved ones. The Day in Retrospect, another WCKT special, wrapped up the highlights of the day, 17 hours after it began. Through it all, WCKT built and held community interest by giving priority to one of the nation's biggest stories of the year, offering quality and quantity programming that easily surpassed the competition in content and immediacy. The timely integration of live and film coverage was made possible by the use of helicopters to transport the film to the WCKT heliport from all key points of news coverage.
So that small clip was an incredible, it's an hour-long experience of my searching through the archives of the Wilson Moving Image Archive, which is part of FIU. And they allow me to use part of the clippings from the as early as 1957, 58. And that was actually programming of the African, I think it's the African princess, that actually goes to Cuba and brings political prisoner in the early 60s to Cuba. Part of the exhibition that accompanies this video that actually tracks the visual migration through the archive of the media, which I was really interested how the media had archived or sort of documented this experience. You get two things. You get the Pew Foundation, which actually tracks all Hispanics in the United States by nationality. They don't focus just on Cubans, and sort of brings out very specific data on them. How often, how early they marry, that kind of income that they have as a group, the language skills, the kind of policies that they have or don't have. Like, you know, Hispanics tend to own more homes than any of the other Hispanics groups that they are, or Latinos groups that they are. Those within Florida do more than any other, than even the Cubans living outside of Florida. And so there's a combination, or not a combination, but accompany the visual record of this experience. It doesn't know yet what the data will be 20 years or 30, 40 years later. You also get on the other side of the wall, which is what you saw, the history of assistance for Cuban immigrants, which was an article published by the Sun Sentinel. And this lists from the very beginning the kind of assistance that the Cuban have received coming to the United States through the government of the United States, and it's primarily policy. This starts as early, I think, as 1960, which is the Miami Cuban Refugee Emergency Center. So opens up with $1 million in federal funding. That is literally now the equivalent to 7 million. Somebody that I had a friend of mine who does this, and she sort of figure out how much would that be in today's day. So imagine any particular group of immigrant coming into the country right now and having $7 million to help them enter into the country and for readjustment and what that would do. And so I was thinking about how this policy that has been in effect, and a lot of it has to do with this Cold War, sort of propaganda and policy, has also really impacted this one particular, it's been for the betterment of this one particular group of immigrants coming to the United States. I don't necessarily know if this has appealed to any other group. And so I actually used the Cuban Heritage Collection, the University of Miami, to begin to document a lot. And so you're seeing the Cuban refugee, the airlift, and these are the freedom flights that take place from like 1968, I believe, to 1973. And so a lot of the documentation also happened beyond photography. And so the video combines the photography. And this is actually the Freedom Tower where the exhibition was, which for Cuban is like the Ellis Island, for them, because they were processed through there. So they were documented. They went there to get their vaccination, to get food, to every supplies, necessity to look for jobs. Everything was held and handled in the Freedom Towers. And, almost 20 years later, we're here at El Mariel. And this is actually a hangar out by Opalaca, where the influx of the Mariel Bolívar was so fast and so great that it's nothing compatible to it in terms of what it took to process this number of people. I can't remember if it was like 30,000 they came through El Mariel, or I think it was more. I forgot the exact number right now. But you're seeing the boats, and the Mariel Bolívar begins with the Cubans that drive the bus into the Peruvian embassy. And that in itself, I think, was 10,000 people. And then Fidel allowed for the families to come in and pick up their family member, and also use the opportunity to sort of release a lot of other, whether political or regular criminals out of the prisons as well, and people with mental illnesses. And it was like sort of a confluence of it all together. again, the next time when this major sort of migration happens in 1994, where again Fidel sort of allows for Cuban to leave, right? It's another moment, is right at the beginning of the special period in 1993 when the Russian sort of the Soviet Union collapsed. The needs are so great in Cuba, and they are allowed to leave. And this time, they're doing it in whatever type of makeshift boxes, wraps. This is running you through the space a little bit before the installation is completely fixed. So for everybody that wasn't able to make the initial exhibition, that's you at the front, you have the historical archival component of it. And then in the back part of the space, you have the contemporary video, which is a video which is what's, part of what was used from the Ellie's grant to make this video on what it would be like if you were migrating today. So that particular version of that edit of that short clip doesn't have the totality of the sound. One of the sounds that we integrated to the very end of the film is when you see all the clothes on the shoreline is the sound of children and family playing and spending a day at the beach. And it was really to create this moment of the beach and the shoreline as a place of enjoyment and family time and laughter and good time. And also, to juxtapose that with all those clothes lying on the shore and that loss of life that also takes place with, for those who don't actually make it, who die at sea, and to really make people more aware of what that means, and how that place can be experienced differently by people who are migrating and making it to shore. And I think these are some of the still images of the video. And so, I mean, I normally work in sculpture. I think this might have a little bit better. So this is actually the installation piece, the video projected into the space. I'm seeing a student of mine, Jenny Hirsch. Is that you? So crazy. Thank you for being here. So the video is one component, and then the installation is another component. And the installation, one of the main components of the installations are the pallet, the shipping pallets. And the shipping pallet is really what standardizes global trade. Because you can put stuff on a pallet, you put pallets into containers, and boom, you're shipping stuff worldwide. And so I wanted to really bring that connection between this global trade and the shipping and moving of commodities and object in relationship also to bodies being moved and being traveled and sort of kind of being shipped also, or even trafficked and sometimes in some cases, and how these two things are interconnected in terms of resources and accessibility. That was a very shaky, hand me moving you through the installations. This is a professional photographer with the imagery, so you can see what the difference it's like. And again, another component that I really wanted to do with this project was to create an immersive environment. One that you came into, you almost felt like it was you or yourself traveling through the back of a shipyard, going on this journey. These two monitors actually have two videos. One is the person that ultimately returns to the shoreline, to the same shoreline, to contemplate the idea of leaving. On the other corner, you have this eternal sunset offering possibility, hope. It's just, all the reasons why, someone would want to go to another place to start again, to have a better life. And so these two functions almost as more like paintings more than video. And so the whole installation takes you through three formats of presentation or working with moving images. You have the archival materials, which are in the CRT monitors, which are your standard all TV with the cube. Then you have the video projection onto the sail, which are, I actually purchased used sails in Fort Lauderdale from this company. And then you have this video, which is one video being split between three monitors, but monitors being one of the last ways in which we're accustomed to looking at these images and receiving these images. And the goal for me with this project was really to if not to disrupt, to add another visual language when we're talking about migration and the kind of images that you see when we are dealing with migration. And for us to consider that this is something that people are doing not necessarily because they just want to go for economical benefits, but that people are often doing it because they are in a situation where their life are in danger, where their livelihood is at stake. And the issue of migrating is not a light thought that anybody takes on or decides to do, but it really it's what one does when there is no other hope, when there is no other opportunity. I hope I didn't rush through that, but I wanted, we're almost close to that time, and I wanted to make sure that we had time to be able to talk about the work and questions, and have the opportunity to have a conversation about the work. As artists, I think we all want to talk about the work, that inspirations, the decisions that we make. For me, this was my first time working in video. Like, I'm feeling comfortable working in sculpture and installation and in 2D and 3D media, but moving into video brought a whole different slew of experiences that I was not familiar with. And when you're having to collaborate with other people, and sort of, even if you create something, you have to be able to communicate that to another person. How do you hold on to your own ideas and make sure that it stays yours, right? um and and and, and also have to collaborate, because you may not necessarily have the skills to be able to do one. Like, I there was no way, like, that I was going to learn to scuba dive, learn to use an underwater camera and film, right? Like, in 6 months, I was going to do that. I was like, no, I'm never going to do that. And in a way, that was good, because it was a great opportunity to find another like-minded soul in the world who could take my ideas and do it. So there was somebody else holding that camera, somebody else creating those images for me, who understood what it was that I wanted to convey. So it's not just me, there's another other person out there that understood what I was trying to say. And that's a really an amazing thing. The same as working with the editors and the sound. One of the things that we really debated was where to have music or not, and what kind of music it would be. And I was like, no, this is not a music video. But we agree on the sound that you hear in the second, when you go through the space, and the sound of the dress, you get this really kind of haunting sound that is made with these natural flutes, Japanese flutes, that really actually create that sensation of even a more haunting experience, that you're like sort of compelled. It really compels the person in the space to really feel that sense of loss. And those are all these kind of decisions that I had to make as I developed the project, and uh, you know got closer to the exhibition dates. Well, thank you for the FAU for being in the house. And it's always a good experience, and I met wonderful people, had great students, and it stayed with me also. I think that experience of being up there. And Rod, 3 weeks from now, I'll be on that part of the screen, and you get to be on this part of the screen, and I'll get to ask you the questions. But I think the best part of this is about sharing, and so this is really great that you all are here to be able to share and to talk about the work and what interests us in the process of making art, especially in these times. I think it's really important that we can come together and celebrate what we do, and the kind of importance that it can have, and how it could actually maybe, hopefully, maybe make a difference. I think that that's the most important thing for me. That it's just maybe a grain of sand, but it could have it could make a difference, and influence people to think about things or to even rethink things. I think for me, the Cuban community feels that the success is based just on their own ability to make do. And I have to say that there are, they're really great in that way. But I think it's also important to acknowledge all these other assistance that has been there for the last 40 years as well, right? And to understand how that can have a play in the way that we deal with migration for other people coming into this country in the future.
Hopefully we will be together in December with big smiles on our faces. Thank you, Juana, hugely.
Thank you for the invitation.
This has been wonderful. That was not only so fascinating, but so moving, and so personal, and so Miami.
Right.
As much as you brought your Cuban experiences with you, it's a project that couldn't have been made no place else but in Miami in so many ways. And I think we're all going to have so much to talk about. And good night, everybody. It was a pleasure sharing this with you.
Yeah. All my friends, good night. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And all the best for everyone.
Thank you, Ellie, very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.